In today's lecture, we are going to talk about one of the important class of biomolecules without which we can't imagine our body organization or the food and the kind of role they play in our day-to-day life. And one such category of biomolecules are proteins. So, as we all know, proteins are structurally, functionally diverse group of biomolecules which do perform a lot of significant functions. They do a big role in metabolism, support, transport, regulation, as well as in activities related to motion. So, we'll just take a few minutes time to discuss about some of the major functions of these proteins. So, the first important function are the metabolic functions. So, as we know, enzymes, which are the biocatalyst, they speed up the chemical reactions in our body. So, all the enzymes are proteins. So, starting from the digestive enzymes which are helping in digestion of food such as protease, amylase, lactase, lipase, all these are enzymes. So, all enzymes are proteins. So, that is how they play a big role as metabolic enzymes. And second category under the metabolic functions, we can't imagine any of the molecular biology experiments with such enzymes like polymerases and ligases. So, these molecular biology significant enzymes are also proteins. And these enzymes, they form a big number, significant ratio of their importance in several industries related to dairy, baby food production, rubber industry, beverages, contact lens cleaners and several other roles. So, the next important function of these proteins, the structural proteins. So, starting from the hair, which is keratin protein, and we also have one of the major protein has a structural protein, that is collagen, which is present or which is supporting our tendons, ligaments and skin. And the silk, which is spun by the silkworm or by the spider web, silk. So, silk is also a protein. So, the three important structural proteins are keratin, collagen and silk. So, the next important class of proteins are transport proteins. So, whatever oxygen entering into our body, it is carried to different parts of the body via hemoglobin. So, hemoglobin is a very major important transport protein. So, that is how the third important function of proteins are transportation. And the fourth significant role that these proteins play are in our body's defense mechanism as antibodies. So, they try to fight against bacteria and viruses. And the next important significant function of these proteins are in the regulation. So, as we know that our body has so many types of enzymes which govern the synthesis, which govern the bodily functions. So, insulin, which is maintaining our blood glucose level, the human growth hormone, which determines the height of an individual, the intracellular messaging capacity, so they are all governed by hormones, and hormones also are proteins. And receptor proteins, which can transmit the nerve signals. So, all these belong to the category of proteins. Then we have these proteins helping in motion, that is mainly in muscle contraction. So, we can't imagine our day-to-day physical activities without muscle contraction. So, our muscles are made up of actin and myosin. So, they are all the muscle contracting proteins. Not only the muscle movement in human beings, but also the movement in case of bacteria or other microorganisms is also governed by proteins. So, what we discussed so far is the biological functions that these proteins play a very big role in different regulations. So, next we will spare a few minutes of time to understand the structure or the building blocks of proteins. Proteins are made up of amino acids. So, amino acid is one molecule which has the carbon center surrounded by a carboxylic group on one side, amino group on the other side. The two amino acids join together by a peptide linkage. So, these amino acids, when they join up together, they make a very big polypeptide chain which we call them as proteins. So, the bond which holds the amino acids together are the peptide bond, or the bonds which are seen in proteins are the peptide bonds. And the amino acids again are classified into different categories, like we have essential amino acids, non-essential amino acids. So, essential amino acids are not synthesized in our body, so we have to consume in the diet. Non-essential amino acids are synthesized in the body, so we don't have to consume them in our diet. So, basically proteins have a very big biological role. They are polypeptides, their building blocks are amino acids. Bond which hold the amino acids together are the peptide bonds, and this polypeptide chain, they fold together, bond together and form large complex molecules called proteins, and they do exist in the form of a three-dimensional structure. So, if we discuss the structure of amino acid, the amino acid center, we have the carbon. On one side is the amino group and on the other side is the carboxylic group, and they have a functional group or the R group which varies. So, that is how we do get different types of amino acids contributing to the makeup of proteins. So, based on the R group, we have different types of amino acids like glycine, alanine, valine, leucine, isoleucine. Like that we have around 20 amino acids. So, amino acids are joined together by peptide bond, and these proteins, like they have a C terminal end and a N terminal end. C terminal end is the carboxy terminal end, N terminal end is the amino terminal end. The proteins, if at all on the N terminal end we find the amino group, we call them as N terminal end, and if it concludes with the carboxylic group, that end we call it as the C terminal or the carboxy terminal. And proteins, based upon the diverse functions they perform, we can further classify them. So, now let us discuss about the classification of proteins based upon their levels of organization. So, proteins exhibit 4 basic structural levels of organization based on the degree of complexity. So, we often refer them as primary proteins, secondary, tertiary and quaternary. Amongst these, the primary structure is just the organization of amino acids to form a polypeptide chain. The secondary structure, they do have the interaction between the proteins. The tertiary structure is the three-dimensional structure, and when different proteins interact together, we call them as the quaternary structure, and they are designated as 1, 2, 3 and 4. So, now we will discuss the levels of protein organization. So, first is the primary structure. Primary structure is a relatively very simple structure which has the linear arrangement of amino acids, and the bond we see in primary proteins are only the peptide bonds, whereas in the secondary structure we see a little bit of folding amongst these proteins. Other than the peptide bond, we also get to see the hydrogen bonds. So, there are 2 types of secondary structures among proteins. We call them as alpha helix and the beta sheets. The third important or the next level of organization of proteins are the tertiary structure of proteins, where the proteins undergo folding, giving a 3-dimensional structure to the proteins. Whatever proteins we discussed playing a big diverse functional role, they all exhibit in the tertiary structure. Tertiary structure is the functional biological structure of proteins. Enzymes, hormones, immunoglobulins, transport proteins, all these exhibit or occur in the tertiary structure. The last organization of proteins are the quaternary structure, So, quaternary structure is formed by the interaction of polypeptide chains. By two or more polypeptide chains interact together to form the quaternary structure. Here, the each interacting protein, we call it as the subunit of the protein. And if any abnormality occurs in the structure or organization of proteins, any missing amino acid, that can lead to any defects. One such protein associated defect in our body is the sickle cell anemia, where the shape of RBC, it is in sickle shape and it's still not able to function. And these proteins, they do undergo denaturation if the protein structure is lost either by exposure to heat, temperature or pH. The term we use is denaturation. Proteins undergo denaturation by unfolding or changes in their shape. So, once the proteins are denatured, they are no longer functional. So, in the brief introduction to proteins, we discussed what is a protein, what are the biological significance of protein and levels of organization of proteins. Thank you.